10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 424. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 424 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. We are going to finish up our series on the rhythm section bridge this week, and we're just going to have some fun. We're going to kind of investigate some not really random, but like some really kind of out there ways of playing the bridge. I think in the last two episodes, I covered some really, really good ways to go beyond just, one chord every two bars, that like big, long 3-6-2-5. I think there's a lot of meat in the last two episodes. So make sure that you really can handle those things that I showed you in episode 422 and 423 before you move on to this. But I figured these are just some sort of fun ways to really play something different, to really play something that might challenge your ears, challenge your brain, challenge your fingers, and just give you some really cool stuff to kind of have up your sleeve when you're playing over rhythm changes that you could use sparingly. And actually, that's something that I want to mention right at the top of this episode. I'm going to show you some really dense ways of playing over rhythm changes bridge. And I will caution you right up front to exercise some restraint when you're using this stuff. It sounds really cool. Like the stuff I'm going to show you are some of my favorite sounding things, but you don't want to use these devices every single time you hit a bridge in your solo. It gets kind of heavy-handed kind of quickly. So my just word of caution up front before we dive into this whole thing is exercise some restraint when you're using these devices. And the second thing I will say about the stuff I'm going to show you today, particularly I've got 4 exercises or 4 examples that I'm going to show you today. The second 2 are going to require a little bit of research on your part. Spoiler alert, they're going to involve the Coltrane cycle, the Coltrane matrix. So if I were to explain all of that on the episode, plus show you what I'm going to have you do, we'd have to have an hour-long episode, and we're just not going to do that. So you may want to make a note that you should go out there and find some information on using the Coltrane cycle. I'll link to a YouTube video that I have that tries to explain it in really simple terms. And then I hope you can go back and sort of make sense of what I'm showing you over the bridge and how it relates to that Coltrane cycle. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's dive into the first iteration of the exercise or the bridge that I have for this week. So if you're a Patreon member, go ahead and pull out your PDF and let's go over example 1 together. All right, so what you will notice right off the bat is we've got a little bit more motion in the second measure. So I want you to draw your attention to beat 3 of the second measure of the bridge. You'll notice that there's a concert A flat chord going to a concert G chord. Now, we've talked about this, that A flat chord is a tritone substitution of the concert D7 chord. So in effect, what we're doing is we're resolving down to the G by way of a half step, and that's a really, really cool sound. So now, if you go to the downbeat of the second measure, you'll notice that I'm utilizing this sound that is whole steps. So we have a concert B flat 7 chord right before the A flat 7 chord. And really that B flat 7 chord doesn't have any kind of like sensical harmonic function. I just think chords moving in whole steps sounds really, really cool. And sort of reflecting that in your solos can be a really interesting sound. So the effect we get moving from concert D7 to G7 with those whole steps and the tritone substitution in there, it sounds like this. We get a bar of D7, B flat 7, A flat 7 to G. And I just think that is one of the hippest sounds. I tend to use that from time to time in my solos. So I figured it'd be a really, really fun one to present to you in this episode. So if we follow that same pattern of a minor third above, moving down to a half step above, resolving to the next chord in the progression, all the way through the bridge, we get the sound of this. This is example 1 in its entirety. And then we're back to that B flat major chord that's going to get us into that last A section. Now, do you hear that by the time we got to the end of the bridge, it almost seemed a little bit heavy-handed, like, oh, this progression again? So that is exactly what I'm cautioning you against when you start to use some stuff like this. You may not want to use it every other measure. You may not want to use this. And this is where the skill of mixing and matching all of the stuff that I've shown you this month comes in really handy. So developing a familiarity with everything such that you can kind of freely do whatever your ears say is the best thing to do, right? And there's so many options. Okay, so let's move on to example number 2. Now, all I've done on example number 2 is I've taken the idea from example number 1 and I've extracted it one level further. So if you look at beat 3 of the first measure of the bridge, you'll see that I'm just continuing my whole step motion. So now I have C7 to B flat 7 to A flat 7, resolving to G7. But if you go back to the very beginning of the bridge, you'll notice that it's all whole steps. And that's one really cool thing about moving around the circle of fourths, is that if you do 3 whole steps from where you start and then resolve by a half step, you get to that next chord in the circle of fourths. So if you start on D7 and you go down in all whole steps, C, B flat, A flat, and then go down 1 half step, you find yourself on that next chord in the circle of fourths, which is G. Now, this is going to be even more heavy-handed than the last one, because you'll notice that I now have a chord every single 2 beats for the entire bridge, and it's basically just moving in whole steps every 2 bars. So let's check out what it sounds like, but word of warning, it is going to be really heavy-handed. All right, so let's check out this madness starting on D7. I mean, it's cool, right? But we probably don't want to do that on every single bridge. It's just going to get to be a little bit too much. Okay? So there's the first 2 examples, 2 of my favorite ways to occasionally play over the bridge. I really want to emphasize that. Okay, so let's go on to example number 3. Now, example number 3 is, again, it's based on the Coltrane cycle. And basically, the Coltrane cycle involves moving to different keys down the interval of a major third and using the 5 chord of each one of those keys to precede the 1 chord. Now, that's all I'm going to say about that. So this is going to require some research and some understanding about the way that the Coltrane cycle works on your part. And believe me, you'll be better off by researching that yourself and sort of figuring it out. And then this will all become clear to you how I got from one place to another. So what I will say is that example number 3 on your PDF is all about targeting the 3rd bar of the bridge as the 1 chord, okay? And then we target the 2nd to last bar of the bridge as the 1 chord. And then all I'm doing in example number 4 is I'm reversing that. So now I'm using the Coltrane cycle chords to target the 5th bar of the bridge and then to resolve to the downbeat of the last A section. But I think just hearing this, and I mean, I highly, highly encourage you to understand what's going on. But one of the cool parts is that you can kind of play over this and sound cool, even if you don't know what's going on. Don't tell anybody I said that, but it's kind of true. All right, so here's example number 3. Now, anybody that's ever listened to Giant Steps or Countdown, that probably sounds really familiar to you. The new thing is just putting it over the bridge to rhythm changes. Okay, let's hear that one more time. All right. And then example number 4 is just using it in the places opposite from where I just used it. So example 4, you're going to hear 2 bars of D7. And then at that point in bar 3 of the bridge, you're going to hear me kick into that Coltrane cycle. And you could decide whether you like both of those equally or whether you'd rather use one or the other. Yeah, that's kind of up to you. Let's hear that one more time. I personally just really love that sound. And it's so interesting to just occasionally start using that Coltrane cycle. That'll definitely pique some interest from your listeners, especially if they're jazz fans and they know what that sounds like. They'll sort of instantly recognize that, hey, I know that. What is that? They might realize, oh, that kind of sounds like Giant Steps. So that's a really interesting one too. Okay, a couple of words before we cap this off here. When you're dealing with a ton of chords like this, where it's very, very, very dense, I'm a big fan, you guys have heard me say this before, of starting with the simplest way of reflecting those chords possible, which in my opinion is triads. And the interest comes from the actual chord progression, from the superimposed chords. So the nice part is you don't have to work so hard to create an interesting line. You simply just outline the structures as clearly as you can, and the harmonic motion kind of takes care of making it interesting. Of course, you're going to want to experiment with more rhythms, inversions of those triads that can make it insanely more interesting, but just start simple and work your way up to complicated. No need to make it more complicated. All right. So that's going to do it. I'm going to prepare an etude for next week. That's going to sort of dip in and out of a whole bunch of these examples that I've given this month. And that'll be really fun because you'll get to hear a bunch of it, in action, which would be great. I hope you've been practicing this stuff. I hope it's opened up some doors to you. And I look forward to kind of hearing your results. If you heard me mention Patreon, that is how we support ourselves on this show. We don't do any advertisements, so we rely on listeners like you. It's a listener-supported podcast. So if you want to figure out more of what that means, we do give PDFs and audio examples and trading tracks and all kinds of really cool stuff with every episode. And it only costs you a couple bucks a month. Head over to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com. and click on one of the Patreon banners. Alternatively, you can go to patreon.com and search for the 10-minute jazz lesson. You will get instant access, and we've got materials for all 424 episodes that we've ever put out over there that you'll be able to access right away. So great stuff happening over there. Quick shout out to some new patrons. Thank you to Michelle, Andres, and Dawn. Thank you guys so much for joining up to become a member of the 10-minute jazz lesson family. And of course, to all the supporters we have over there, some of who have been supporting us for years at this point. Thanks. We could not do this show without you. All right, everybody, we'll see you next week with the etude and to wrap up these ideas. Hope you had fun with this series. I know I had fun making it. And remember, go slowly through all this stuff. I've laid a lot of information on you over the course of 3 weeks. That's going to take a lot longer than 3 weeks to unpack. So be okay with that. Talk to you all soon. Hope you're doing well. Bye.